The New York Times recently began posting the celebrations of gay unions. Not just straight people getting married, but gay people who want to announce their unions. Do you think New York State should recognize gay marriage?
No.
No. Okay.
I believe that marriage is not just a bond, but a sacred bond between a man and a woman. I have had occasion in my life to defend marriage, to stand up for marriage, to believe in the hard work and challenge of marriage. So I take umbrage at anyone who might suggest that those of us who worry about amending the Constitution are less committed to the sanctity of marriage or to the fundamental bedrock principle that it exists between a man and a woman going back into the mists of history as one of the foundational institutions of history and humanity and civilization, and that its primary principal role during those millennia has been the raising and socializing of children for the society into which they are to become adults. I believe that marriage should be protected. I believe that marriage is essential. You know, the states, which have always defined and enforced the laws of marriage, are taking action. 38 states, maybe it's up to 40 now, already have laws banning same-sex marriage. Voters in at least 8 states are considering amendments to their constitutions reserving marriage to unions between a man and a woman. But the sponsors argue that we have to act with a federal constitutional amendment because the full faith and credit clause of that Constitution will eventually force states, if there are any left, force states that don't wish to recognize same-sex marriages to do so. Well, that is not the way I read the case law. You know, with all due respect, the way I read the case law is that the full faith and credit clause has never been interpreted to mean that every state must recognize every marriage performed in every other state. You know, we had states that allowed young people to marry when they were 14, and then states that allowed young people to marry when they were 16 or they were 18. The full faith and credit clause did not require that any other state recognize the validity of a marriage of a person below the age of marital consent according to their own laws. Every state reserves the right to refuse to recognize a marriage performed in another state if that marriage would violate the state's public policy. And indeed, the Supreme Court has long held that no state can be forced to recognize any marriage. Now, that's what the case law has held, but just to make sure that there were no loopholes in that case law, the Congress passed and the President signed the Defense of Marriage Act, known as DOMA. The Defense of Marriage Act has not even been challenged at the federal level. And because the Supreme Court has historically held that states do not have to recognize laws of other states that offend their public policy, it's assumed that any challenge would be futile. You know, if you look at what's happened in the last several months, and there are others in this body who are more able to discuss this than I because it affects the laws of their states, but as Senator Kennedy said, in Massachusetts, a court decision will be challenged by a referendum. In California, San Francisco's action permitting the licensing of same-sex marriages was stopped by the California state courts. The DOMA law that was enacted already protects states from having to recognize same-sex marriage licenses issued in other states. And maybe we can come to some agreement that the founders had it right and that the concerns that have been expressed about marriage will be taken care of as they traditionally have in the states which have held the responsibility since before our founding as a nation. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
You support civil unions.
I do.
But not gay marriage.
I've always believed that marriage should be left to the states because that's where it's always been. The states have determined age of marriage, other conditions, and that's now happening. People are making decisions. Civil unions, marriage, they're deciding in the states, and I think that's the appropriate place for this to be.
Yeah, I think that's important.
And in our country, the issue of same-sex marriage, which is it's a matter left to each state sets the rules, is proceeding on a state-by-state basis. I think that's the best way for it to proceed. I have not supported same-sex marriage. I have supported civil partnerships and contractual relationships. Yet I am supportive of our states taking actions that they believe reflects the evolution of attitudes about this. It is a signature issue, and as the young man just said, for many people it is sort of a symbolic issue that if you don't support that, you don't support equality between people, and particularly for the LGBT community. But I am very comfortable saying that we in the Obama administration fully support every kind of equality, opening up opportunities in the State Department, which is my province of jurisdiction, and we will continue to support states making their own decisions about this.